Welcome to Liberty TV, the only program dedicated to setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. From the studios of Access TV in Salina, Kansas, I'm your host, D.C. Hanna. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Liberty TV. This season on Liberty TV, we're talking about economic liberty. We began by introducing the idea of individualism, in which the single human being is the largest and the smallest unit of moral agency. Your left foot doesn't have a mind of its own, no matter what this woman believes, and neither does a group, a nation, or a mob. Only the individual is a moral agent. As an individual, each of us exercises free will, choosing between one option or another, or choosing none of the above. I make choices or exercise my free will when I identify the best option, consider the consequences, and take action without external force or coercion. How much information do I need to identify the best option? I don't know everything, nor do you, nor does anyone, no matter what the average 12-year-old says. In fact, the universe of things I don't know is much larger than the universe of things I do. The same is true for each of us. But I don't need to know everything about any subject to make an informed decision, nor do you. If you want to buy a loaf of bread, you only need to know a few things: how much money you have to spend, the price of bread, from whom to buy the bread, and how to tell good bread from bad. You don't need to know how to raise the wheat, bake the bread, or drive the truck that takes the bread to the grocery store. Although no one person can know all of those things, someone has to know about each of them. Wheat doesn't plant itself or harvest itself. Bread doesn't bake itself. Trucks don't drive themselves. None of those things happen by magic, or good intentions, or divine intervention. Each requires the mind and the hands of a person. What would inspire someone to raise wheat, bake bread, or drive a truck? Each person is motivated by his opportunity to gain wealth. Whether that opportunity is to create wealth as a farmer or business owner, or to earn a living as the employee of another, someone has to know that his success will come from providing goods or services in exchange for money or something else of value. The farmer, baker, and truck driver don't need to know anything about you. They don't even need to know that you exist. They certainly don't need to know the details of your desire to buy a loaf of bread. They only need to know that someone wants to pay them for their goods or services. The farmer needs to know that someone will buy his wheat. The baker needs to know that a grocery store will buy his bread. And the truck driver needs to know that someone will pay him to haul a load of bread to market. But the principle doesn't just apply to a loaf of bread. The economist Leonard Read wrote an essay called I, Pencil, describing the phenomenon of economic self-interest and the way in which no one needed to know everything to make, buy, or sell goods and services. Based on his essay, the Foundation for Economic Education produced the following video.
This is the world we live in. If we weren't surrounded by it every day, if we didn't take it for granted, we'd be dumbstruck by its very intricacy and brilliance. This is an ordinary, familiar wooden pencil. You might think a pencil is simple. Chances are you've been using one since before you could even read or write. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's simple. In fact, it's complicated, elaborate, beautiful, elegant. Its very existence is too improbable for any one person to truly comprehend. These are the basic materials that go into a pencil: graphite, cedar, metal, and rubber. But if you had all the elements of a pencil right in front of you, could you make a pencil? It's not as easy as you might think. In fact, no single person on the face of the earth could do it without the help of countless others. And this is the key to understanding the world. A pencil, just like you and me, is the end result of a vast and intricate family tree, a symphony of human activity that spans the globe. Through their work and knowledge, a vast number of people have had a hand in making this simple pencil. Unlike your family tree, this one begins with an actual tree. The most immediate ancestor of the pencil is a cedar tree in the Pacific Northwest. But the loggers who harvest the timber are also its ancestors. And these men don't work alone. They, in turn, are assisted by the people and industries that produce the saws, rope, and countless other tools that they use. These are also the ancestors of our pencil. As is the waitress at a nearby diner who sells the loggers lunch, to say nothing of the thousands of people involved in producing that simple midday meal. Across time and space, the web grows. Consider the roads, trucks, ships, communication systems, and the people who design, build, and maintain them. All of them are necessary to bring the lumber to the mills and the slat factories that process them. All of them are also the ancestors of the pencil. And even with the work of all these people, so far all we have is a stained wooden slat, a naked half of a wooden body of a pencil. But its family tree is larger and more extensive. The graphite is mined in China and Sri Lanka. At the pencil factory, it's mixed with clay and heat and other materials before it's extruded, dried, and baked in a kiln. People from different continents, different cultures, cooperate to bring these materials together with waxes and kilns and equipment from across the world. These too are the ancestors of the pencil. And the same is true of the eraser. With ingredients from around the world, it's the end result of a similarly complex and exotic branch of the family tree. As is the ferrule, the metal band made from material that is mined, refined, and shipped from all over the world. Each part of the pencil is the result of the collaboration and cooperation of millions of people. Together, they form a process that is constantly changing and adapting. A change in the availability or cost of material from one place might make another source more desirable, and the process changes and adapts fluidly. And there is a fact that's still more astounding: the absence of a mastermind, of anyone dictating these countless actions which bring a pencil into being. Each member of this family tree supplies only a small amount of the necessary know-how needed to make a pencil. They do so voluntarily, not because they necessarily want pencils or like pencils, but because by working to create them, they exchange their labor and skills for the wages that let them buy what they want and need. What you're seeing is the market at work. The spontaneous configuration of creative human energies, of millions of people with their various skills and talents organizing voluntarily in response to human necessity and desire, as if led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of the intention. Every second we are alive, we benefit from the products of voluntary, spontaneous cooperation. This is the modern world. It's miraculous, it's intricate, and it gets better every day, so long as people are free to interact with each other. If we can leave the creative energies of humankind uninhibited, there's no limit to what we can accomplish.
Milton Friedman, the economist and Nobel laureate, used the essay I Pencil in his book, Free to Choose. He wrote about Adam Smith, the Scottish economist, and Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations. Smith used the term the invisible hand to describe the connection of each person's self-interest, creating an economy which is beneficial for its participants. Friedman was a well-known practitioner of the Austrian School of Economics, a school of thought in which the economy is not guided or controlled, and success is measured by the greatest number of people who benefit. In the Austrian school, each participant in a transaction chooses to trade because he will benefit from it. That's called free trade. To an Austrian school economist, ignorance of the motivations and needs of the other participants is a benefit, not a liability. In the examples of the loaf of bread and the pencil, requiring you to take into account the benefit to every participant would by necessity force you to make trades that do not benefit you. Karl Marx believed that this consideration was necessary for equality, and an authority was required to assure that no one benefited at the expense of another. Ultimately, the government benefits at the expense of all of us. In Marx's transitional phase of government, which he called socialism, the government is a benevolent dictator, taking from each person according to his ability and giving back to him according to his need, while government declares itself the arbiter of each man's ability and each man's need. But what kind of dictator is truly benevolent? Can a benevolent master control the actions of an individual for the benefit of all? The Democrat and Republican parties want you to believe that. Both major parties are built on the idea that the individual is less qualified to decide what's right for himself and needs government to do the right thing for him, whether he likes it or not. Democrats want to control your wealth or property for a greater good, and Republicans want to control your exercise of free will or liberty for a different, greater good. Can a government force equality by taking from the person who invests his time and energy to create wealth and giving it to the person who can't or won't? Doesn't that enslave one citizen for the benefit of others? Another great Austrian school economist, Friedrich A. Hayek, believed so and wrote of it extensively in his book, The Road to Serfdom. In future editions of Liberty TV, we will compare Friedman and Hayek's view of economics with the 20th century's dominant proponent of central planning, John Maynard Keynes. So let's look at the idea of a benevolent dictator. Hey, you know what's best, right? So you'd be a great king, a fantastic benevolent dictator. So what would you do if you were king?
If you were king.
So the world is a pretty messed up place. But just think how great it would be if you were in charge, if you were selected to be king of the world. Just think of all the good you could do if you were given unlimited power to make things right. You would make the world a veritable utopia. You could feed the poor and house the homeless and defeat the wicked and protect the innocent. You could save the world. Everyone would love you and thank you. If you just had the power, you could make everything fair and just and safe. Well, no, you couldn't. You might try and you might mean well, but any great and noble plans you had would soon fall apart, and you would turn into a tyrant. This isn't because you're stupid or because you're a bad person. Even if you're quite intelligent and have the best of intentions, all your effort to use your power for good would be an absolute, complete, and utter failure. Why? Well, let's consider a few examples.
Agenda item number 1, helping the poor.
Suppose, as a benevolent king, you decided to give lots of stuff to the needy to help the poor. Surely that would be a noble thing to do and would make society better, wouldn't it? Well, no, and here's why. Whether it's a king, a Congress, or anything else, government doesn't create any wealth. Any wealth it gives away, it first has to take from somebody else. As king, before you could give anything to the poor, you'd have to take it from someone else. But suppose that someone else didn't want to hand it over. Whether he just wants to keep it himself or wants to give it away by himself, or thinks you do a bad job of it, if for any reason he didn't want to fund your plan, what would you do about it? If you're king, you don't just ask people nicely. Anyone can do that, but no one has to listen to them or cooperate. As king, you would be commanding people to fund your ideas. And those commands, if they're going to be any more than suggestions, will be backed by the threat of punishment for those who don't obey you. If some peasant doesn't think he can afford it, or doesn't trust you to spend it wisely, or just wants to keep his own money, what will you do about it? Just let it slide? Not if you want to have any power. If your subjects can ignore you without any consequences, then you have no power. So the peasant who wouldn't fund your plan must be punished and made an example of. Suddenly, you're not just benevolently giving stuff away, you're hurting people who don't want to do things your way. Whether you execute the peasant or imprison him or burn his house down or take some of his stuff, whatever, you'll be doing harm to him simply because he wouldn't let you take his money. Suddenly, being king isn't just about being caring and generous. It's not just about giving and helping. It's about controlling and punishing. It's about threatening and hurting people.
Agenda item number 2, serving the common good.
Next, maybe you'd want to build public schools so your subjects' children could get a good education. And you'd build a big library and a public park and museums and zoos and a great road system and hospitals and all sorts of things that will benefit the people in general. And your people will love you for being so charitable and thoughtful. But again, how do you pay for it? Kings don't get castles and piles of gold by working hard. They get those things by taxing their subjects. Every penny you spend, whether you're spending it on yourself or on so-called public projects, you first have to take from your peasants. In reality, you're not giving them anything. You're merely spending their money for them. What if they wanted to spend it some other way? Well, if you let everyone spend his own money, you would have no power. Asking nicely won't do it. If some peasant wants to buy a bigger house instead of helping to pay for a library, or wants to buy more land or save for the future instead of chipping in for a public school, what will you do? If you do nothing and let him get away with that, all your power is gone. Again, to remain king, you have to punish those who won't fund your agenda. So not only are you merely buying the peasantry things with their own money, rather than giving them anything that actually belongs to you, but you're also threatening to cage or otherwise punish them if they resist your efforts to spend their money. You can loudly proclaim that it's for their own good and that your plan is better for the people as a whole, but if some of them don't see it that way, you're still going to have to send out your mercenaries to crush any dissenters.
Agenda item number 3, enforcing good choices.
So trying to be a benevolent king by giving your subjects things that you bought with money you first stole from them turns out to be a lot less noble and less fun than you had expected. So you try a different approach. You decide to use your power and authority to make people live healthier lives. You require everyone to exercise for at least an hour a day and to eat a well-balanced diet. Undoubtedly, that would improve the health of many of your subjects. So how could they complain about that? What could be wrong with that? Well, what do you do if somebody disobeys? If some peasant won't eat his vegetables, what do you do about it? Ask nicely? Being in charge isn't about asking, it's about telling, it's about commanding. And a command isn't a command if there are no consequences for disobedience. So the non-compliant would have to be punished. Whether you take some of the peasant's money and call it a fine, or put him in prison, or have him publicly flogged, you will have to intentionally and publicly hurt him one way or another simply because he wouldn't follow your advice. If you ban smoking or drinking or using drugs or eating too much candy, there have to be adverse consequences to any peasant who disobeys. No matter how good you think your suggested choices might be, you're going to have your mercenaries forcibly punish in one way or another those who refuse to make the choices you think they should make, the choices you tell them to make. As a result, suddenly you're not just a helpful leader, you're a vicious thug. Even if the choices you're forcing people to make are what they should be choosing on their own anyway. Suddenly your good intentions, when combined with the exercise of power, become acts of violence. And suddenly your victims, I mean your subjects, don't seem all that appreciative anymore. In fact, they seem to resent you and your supposedly benevolent agenda. But maybe you can still find a way to use your power for good.
Agenda item number 4, protecting the innocent.
What if, instead of trying to coerce your subjects into making good choices or funding useful projects, you stick to something more basic, just trying to protect the good people from any nasty crooks and thugs who might be living in your kingdom, which in this case is the entire planet. Surely there can't be anything wrong with that. If there is any way to use power for good, it has to be protecting the good from the wicked. So that's what you devote yourself to, confident that you'll finally make the world a better place as king. But again, your subjects don't have a choice about funding it. If they think your enforcers are abusive or corrupt, if they think your view of justice is skewed, if they don't think your protection services are worth the price, do you allow them to opt out? Not if you want to remain king. The mercenaries you hire, the prisons you build, the army you create with its war machines, not all of your peasants will want it or will agree with how it functions. Do you just say, I know best and it's for your own good, and then lock up those who don't pay? Do you force your version of justice and security on them, force them to pay for it and expect them to like it and thank you for it? To say that all you're doing is protecting people while you're sending armed thugs to collect payments from people who don't want your so-called protection makes you look more like the mafia than like a savior and protector. If some peasant wants to protect himself or wants to hire someone other than you and your goons to protect him, do you let him? Or do you force him to fund your idea of justice and security? If a peasant doesn't like what your army does or how it does it, do you allow him to choose to not financially support your agenda? Again, retaining your power requires you to violently impose your agenda on your subjects, forcing them to fund it, crushing any resistance, and doing all of that in the name of defending them against thugs and thieves. And that's more than a little ironic. It's hard to feel noble and righteous, or even honest, while you're routinely committing aggression against people in the name of protecting them.
Agenda item number 5, sit in your castle and do nothing.
Well, it seems your ambition of using your newfound unlimited power to fix the world hasn't turned out so well. You tried to do good stuff and be caring and compassionate, but everything just came out as threats and violence. Because after all, that's what law and government are. So in desperation, you decide to do nothing. You leave your subjects alone and you hide in your castle, sulking. But wait, how did you pay for the castle, and your guards, and all the luxuries you have? Even if you do away with most of it, whatever you end up with, are your subjects going to want to voluntarily pay for you to sit on your lazy butt while they deal with the challenges of reality on their own? Doubtful. So if you intend to continue in this life of luxury as king, you're still going to have to force your subjects to fund it. And that means even if you do nothing at all for the peasants, you're still going to need guards and an army and tax collectors just to remain king.
The punchline.
And that brings us to the final agenda item, the one you should have started with. When you were made king and appointed to be in charge of everything, you should have said no. When offered the opportunity to rule and command your fellow man, you should have turned it down. If given power over others, what you should have done with that power is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because power via brute force cannot fix the world. Authoritarian control, whether wielded by a king or an elected government or a constitutional republic, cannot improve society. Why not? because all such power by its very nature is nothing more than the ability to threaten people and hurt people. And whatever your intentions may be, you can't improve human society, you can't create peaceful civilization by threatening and hurting people. Shouldn't that be obvious, self-evident? Sadly, almost everyone has fallen for the utterly insane notion that the human race can be made more moral and more civilized by taking a few human beings and giving them permission to threaten and hurt, to forcibly rule and control everyone else. Such an idea is pure lunacy, no matter how popular it may be, and no matter how much rhetoric and how many excuses you pile on top of it. You can pontificate all you want about constitutions and elections, representative government, consent of the governed, and so on and so forth, but that won't change reality. And anyone who dares to objectively consider things for 5 minutes will see that the reality of the situation is this: authoritarian power, in any form, regardless of the goal or motives, is nothing more than the addition of more aggressive, immoral violence into society. It doesn't matter how many nice suits, fancy hats, grandiose buildings, and pompous rituals and ceremonies you use. Whether it comes from King You or a bunch of elected politicians, the power to rule is always and inherently diametrically opposed to the power of being human. Want to fix the world? Throw the crown away. Ignore politics. Don't threaten, attack, or rob your neighbor, and don't vote for anyone who offers to threaten, attack, or rob your neighbor on your behalf. Don't, by yourself or by way of those in power, try to force others to be what you wish they were, or force them to fund what you wish they would fund. Instead, try treating your neighbor as if he owns himself, because he does.
If you want a more thorough understanding of why the game called politics is always destructive and immoral, get a copy of The Most Dangerous Superstition, available at Amazon.com.
So, there really are no benevolent dictators. Free will is the tool of the individual, and compulsion by force is the tool of the collective. As a libertarian and an individualist, I oppose the ideas of the collective and central control and champion the individual, free will, and free markets. What do you believe in, and what will you champion? I encourage you to listen to me on KINA's new radio show, Straight Talk, from 8 to 10 p.m. on 910 a.m. and 94.5 FM. You'll get news, talk, and features from a libertarian and individualist perspective, and we'll also have some fun along the way. This has been Liberty TV, produced in cooperation with the Libertarian Party of Saline County. Tune in next time when we will continue to set brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. I'm DC Hanna. Live free or die.